And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. This is the podcast of podcasts. If you are trying to get a recipe for bundt cake, you are on the wrong podcast. And if you are trying to find out how to get the most advantage out of selling your home, you're on the wrong podcast. However, if you are looking for insights to Bay Area sports and you're looking for it in a unique way, guess what? You just put your GameFace on. I am Richard the Razor Ewing. This is GameFace. I do this every week with my main man, Mike the Shoe Shumann. And today we got a special guest. We have the great Ben Parker from Rivals.com. And this guy is amazing. I bumped into him before. We talked about the possibility of linking up thing, and I worked hard to try to get him here. He's here now. Ben, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, I'm telling you something. It's a pleasure to have you here. And I tell you something, Mike is itching with anticipation. He can't wait to start with the questions for you. But I'm going to butt in and ask you a question first.
Well, before you get started, though, Richard, bundt cake? Is there really a podcast on how to make bundt cake?
Hey, man, you said it yourself. There's thousands of podcasts. There probably is. I don't know.
All right. NBA and college hoops on deck. Why don't you start us off with Ben?
Well,
Ben.
Well, this is the thing. I had a question for Ben because Ben covers college hoops and particularly Cal basketball. Now, right, and we know that recently, the sports world has been hit very hard with the COVID-19 and how it's really just affected all of us. Doesn't matter who you are, what you're doing. So I want to ask Ben, because you basically have insight in Cal basketball, and so the reason why it was nice to be able to get you on is that we want to get your insights on exactly what you're seeing and what you're hearing from some of the players, some of the coaches, just an insight on how this is affecting one particular team that's having to deal with COVID-19.
Yeah, so what I can tell you from the Cal side, from the Cal hoop side, from what I know is, number one is, they're following all the necessary precautions that they're supposed to be doing with the virus and everything. And players are able to practice, which is good for them. But what was interesting was the fact that I learned that at least one player upon arriving, because they have a lot of different – the thing about this current Cal team is they got guys kind of from all over the globe. So they got one guy from Canada, a couple of guys from Australia, at least one guy from Australia, a guy from Germany, Greece. It was a very international team. And one of the players, I won't say who it was, one guy who's international had to quarantine upon arriving in campus. So, it's just kind of made things kind of interesting for the team in that respect. And, I think at least for Cal, I think what is, interesting for them is they have a lot of new pieces this year. They added 2 grad transfers and Mikael Foreman and Ryan Bentley, and overall pretty young team that's, looking to kind of make some waves and kind of hopefully go up the Pac-12 standings. So, I think from a mental standpoint, it's hard to kind of like keep yourself calibrated as a team when you're not sure if you're going to have a season, when it's going to start, and you have a lot of pieces that you want to integrate, and you have to follow these kind of procedures about quarantining and getting guys coming in from different parts of the globe. So it's been an interesting impact on the team thus far.
I think too, and we're seeing it at the pro level, the bubble with the NBA is working, and in National Hockey League. And for team sports, I had real question marks about it. We're seeing it in baseball, which is kind of out of control. Football, not at the college level, although 3 of the major conferences still are refusing to back down or are going to play. Pac-12 did not, though. But in basketball, it feels like maybe because there's a smaller group of guys, they could control their players, even though they're on a college campus, a little easier than they could football or any other team sport. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I would. And that's the reason why I'm hopeful, very cautiously optimistic that they can maybe work something out with basketball, just because you have only, 15 guys on a team max, 13 scholarship players, And I think you're right, Mike, that the fact that there's fewer players makes it a lot easier to control guys and have that control environment. As in football, as you know, there's like 75 to 100 guys on the college team. It's impossible, to control that. So I think you're right that having fewer players, I think makes it easier for basketball to navigate this. And then also too, in terms of cohesion, if you're losing like maybe one or two guys due to a quarantine for a week versus football, it'd be like 7, 8, 9 guys, whatever, having a quarantine. So I think you're right that the basketball, there's a lot more hope that they could maybe work something out.
All right, quick follow-up. You're seeing already, I think it was North Carolina, the students were back on campus. They were already at a party, no mask, and they had to shut down basically for the freshmen. They're going back to virtual. And another reason with a smaller group of guys, you got 15 guys, you can kind of police each other. Hey, dude, you can't go out to this party. You can't go pledge this fraternity tonight. We got to stay together, stay here, stay in the bubble. And I think they'll have a little better. I mean, what's your feeling about players coming back on campus, to play a collegiate sport?
You mean in terms of like?
Well, there's the risk, the effort to stay COVID free, everything that's involved with coming back. Because if students aren't coming back and doing virtual, these athletes are going to be the only ones on campus, so to speak.
Right. Look, I personally think that the NBA, and granted it's different with the NBA because you got professional basketball players there, and that's their job and their livelihood, and they don't have to worry about taking classes and all that. So it's easier for them to bubble away and do what they've done. But I really do feel like, there's a lot that college teams can learn from, right? If you keep your guys isolated away from each other. And obviously, if you have no fans in the arena, and you really, I think if teams are willing, I think the big thing is getting teams to be committed and schools being committed to taking the virus seriously. And I do think you're right that if guys police each other and guys are serious about this, there is a way to navigate this. But it's just a matter of commitment and taking it seriously. But one thing I can tell you is, a lot of college basketball players last year were really disappointed to not be able to compete in the NCAA tournament. I know Cal was disappointed to have the Pac-12 tournament cut short after they beat Stanford.
Yeah.
So, I think a lot of teams, a lot of guys don't want to have to go through that again. I think guys are okay to start in January and have a postponed, maybe delayed season. And one interesting note on that, at Pac-12 Media Day last year, Commissioner Larry Scott floated out the possibility of a one-semester college basketball season. So I don't think that, the fact that that's even been something that they've discussed, I think means that, for at least this season, having a season starting in January with proper precautions could work. Last thing I'll say too is I think one thing that can definitely be done, they've discussions of this is there's no reason why you couldn't have a bubble type of tournament kind of environment.
Right.
So I think the biggest hurdle for college basketball is figuring out how to get the regular season completed, even if it is just conference games. Because I think if they can figure that part out, an NCAA tournament should be able to happen following the NBA's model.
And there's no strip clubs in Berkeley, so it'll be easier to keep you guys in.
That's very true. Yeah. No.
I knew you would know that.
Okay, but this is the thing though. When it comes down to it, you look at the fact that, to your point, Ben, because you're talking about the fact that Cal did beat Stanford last year, and so they had the chance to be able to do something this season. So doesn't it seem more probable? If I'm a head coach and I got my guys and we understand disappointment, we understand COVID, we understand everything that's happening, how this is affecting everybody as a whole, isn't it more probable as a coach that to put into the brain cells of these young men that, hey, look, you know what? Staying focused, staying committed, regardless of when this season starts, is going to be more of an advantage to you based on, one, what's causing your motivation. Okay, and what is that? What happened last season? What's causing your motivation this year? Well, obviously not being able to do the normal. So if you can keep these men primed as they're supposed to be, when it's time to lace them up and put the ball on the court, okay, I think that, to me, has a lot more, fuel in the engine to basically inspire these guys. And when they do get on the court, they know, hey, look, it's time to play ball, okay? And to me, this kind of seems like where the coaches really need to be, I guess you could say, the catalyst in this. Am I right about this? Did this sound, relative or?
No, you're right that, the number one job of coaches right now is to, as much as there's two components to it. There's the physical side, right, of getting guys physically prepared. But I think you touched on something important, which is that the mental side is the more important part of this, really.
Right.
Because you got to keep guys motivated and sharp and getting ready to, be expected for a season to start. Who knows when, right? So I think the mental preparation part is absolutely critical for these coaches. And I can touch on the Cal side and that. Head coach Mark Fox, one of the things he's known for doing a good job of is player development, developing guys and keeping his guys engaged and ready. So yeah, I think that's something that he's looking to do. And I think other coaches, if they want to have success as well, they're going to have their guys mentally prepared. The mental side is probably the most important part of this for sure.
Definitely.
Well, and he inherited such a just beaten down program. I can't recall the previous head coach, but I just didn't have a real high regard for him. And thinking of just kind of thinking out loud here, for instance, seniors in high school this year. If you're a football player right now, you're not going to be able to play. This is your year to get a scholarship. Incoming freshmen to Cal. They don't get the preseason camps and a lot of things that they normally don't. Maybe a junior or senior at Cal who's thinking about going pro after this year. They're not going to be able to show off their wares if they don't have a season. You got to feel for these high school and college athletes because they're not getting paid, and yet they're looking to get paid with high school with a scholarship, college kids with a pro contract. I mean, what's your feeling? Have you talked to many of the players? Are they disappointed that a lot of this is going down or no?
Yeah, no, they're very disappointed. That's it. They're just disappointed. I think, but the group I feel bad for is I think the seniors on both sides of it. You got high school seniors that are looking to have one final year of high school, right? And that's not happening for them, right? And then obviously for the college seniors as well is like same thing. They lost their season. So yeah, guys are incredibly disappointed. However, I think everyone kind of understands that what's going on and why it's needed to be happening in terms of the fact that, look, a pandemic is happening and it's a crisis and lives are on the line here. So I think most players, at least from what I've seen, understand why it's happening, and they're not fighting it from like a public safety health standpoint, but they're absolutely disappointed. And the thing too is a lot of the kids that I get to cover are obviously, elite high school athletes. That's why they're being recruited by schools like Cal or, Oklahoma or whatever the case may be. And so these are kids who I'm in contact with, at least, are kids that are, looking to run it back for a second state championship, or they lost the state championship last year and they're hoping to get some blood and payback. And it's like, for them to think that might not happen, that's a really tough thing for them to deal with.
Yeah. Especially high school. That's the most exciting time of your life, really. Do you know anybody your age or kids you're covering that have had COVID? And if you do, how was it? Because kids your age, and I remember your age, I thought I was invincible. So I probably would not have taken it that serious either. It's just like the flu, we'll be fine. Do you know anybody your age or younger that's had it?
Not personally, no. I don't know anybody personally my age who's had it. So I really can't speak to that.
I do
think what's got to be a little hard for some of these athletes is to kind of think about the fact that percentage-wise, at least, they're a much lower risk of dying from the virus. So, I mean, that's got to be kind of a little weird too. Like, why can't we go compete when we're not the ones at risk?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a tough thing for them to deal with. Absolutely.
So we're gonna shift gears here. I want to move over to the NBA. I think one of the reasons why is because the playoffs start today. And, Shu was talking about the NBA bubble, and, you were talking about the fact that might be something that, the college ranks might want to consider to be able to continue seasons. Well, it's continuing in the NBA. Some of the things that we've seen, and I just want to put this out there first and foremost, is I am all for the digital presence of fans in the NBA. I'm for that. I think that's amazing. And when they did that, I was like, okay, great. Because the MLB tried to come up with cardboard cutouts. And I'm just going, okay, look, you know what? That has to be the most asinine idea that anyone's ever come up with. And to make matters worse, they told people, oh, we're going to charge you money. Are you out of your mind? You're going to charge me money so that they can see my mug. I'm not even physically there. Are you out of your mind? Okay, so I see the digital cutouts, not cutouts, excuse me, but the digital pictures at the NBA bubble, and I'm thinking, okay, you know what? That's more acceptable. So what are we seeing with the NBA bubble? We're seeing different things. That's what we're seeing. And one of the things that I thought was very different is the fact that we're seeing multiple games in the course of a day. So if you're like an NBA, a rat or junkie like me, you're loving this. Shoot, how many games you get to watch today? What would you watch?
I watched 2 games today. And
Okay.
by the way, we talked earlier, Jaylen Brown went off today for the Celtics as they beat the 76ers in game 1. So loved him in Cal, love him in the NBA.
Okay, there you go. Now, I wanted to point out Donovan Mitchell had like the game of his career today. 57 points. Unfortunately, it was in a loss, but man, that's just okay. Ben, your thoughts on somebody doing that to another team? I mean, come on, 57 points, that's amazing.
Yeah, so look, I'm a Utah Jazz of the team. I grew up as a Utah Jazz fan, so I follow them pretty closely.
Right?
Yeah, I'm family from Utah, so that's a connection. I grew up watching Stockton and Malone.
Okay.
And when I was a kid, the Warriors just weren't very good, so Jazz were my team. Yeah, look, I mean, I think that, in case of Donovan Mitchell at least, it's got to be incredibly frustrating to put up that kind of points and lose, obviously. But, I mean, I think, that Denver-Utah series is going to be really, really interesting because those two teams, they see each other 4 times a year on average because they're in the same division, right? And then the Nuggets and the Jazz, what's fun with that series, I think, is, you got 2 teams that are both really eager to make waves in the Western Conference and kind of go up the rankings, so to speak. Teams that people are talking about, I say, hey, maybe 1 or 2 years away from winning a title. But I'd say the thing I'm probably most interested in with this bubble is to see if some team can kind of get hot or catch fire. And you mentioned Mitchell after 57. This wasn't in the playoffs, but a couple of days ago, Damian Lillard dropped 61 points in a game and went absolutely wild. So I think what I'm really interested to kind of see is to see if some team can kind of get hot, and because there's no home court advantage in this bubble. So I think it creates more possibilities for some upsets. And who knows, you might see some team that's like lower seeded take advantage of the lack of home court advantage and make a run. And, something like a Donovan Mitchell going out, and I know they lost, but some guy kind of going wild and leading their team is something that I think we're going to see more of, which should make the playoffs more interesting and exciting.
And I've said that. We talked earlier in the year, Richard, that don't sleep on Denver and Utah. Both teams that are tough and, they play you hard. And I think this is kind of what's exciting about this bubble. Like you said, Ben, somebody can come out of here with no home court advantage. That's huge in the NBA. But overall, when they first put it together, I said there's no way this is going to work. And then Mark Spears, right, so the undefeated was down there. We had him on, and he said he feels safer there than he would anywhere else in the world. So you got to give the NBA credit. I think more than any league, they have kind of set the standard of protocol, how to make this work, and kind of led the way for team sports at the professional level. Agree?
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that because what I was going to say too is the NBA didn't just set the tone for sports. They set the tone for society. It felt like Rudy Gobert set the positive for set up a domino effect for all of this. As soon as the NBA pausing their season was the first major shoe to drop, the first major domino to fall in all this. Mm-hmm. And as soon as they made the decision to postpone their season due to the virus, that made like society as a whole take this a lot more seriously. And so the NBA, and then the NBA, same with the whole Black Lives Matter thing, the NBA is just leading out on so many different layers and fronts when it comes to social justice and public awareness for things. So, it goes beyond sports with them. They're impacting society, and it's pretty interesting to see that, I think.
Well, the irony of that is Gobert joked about it. Remember in his last interview, he touched all the reporters.
Yeah, that was
reporting. He's like, oh, yeah, I have it. And then he had it.
Yeah.
So it was almost like a little parody of it, but yet, like you said, Ben, it made them take it seriously. So I agree. The NBA has always kind of been up front like that. So, Richard.
I'll tell you something, Shu, and to Ben's point, not so much just the NBA, but really, you got to tip your hat to the Golden State Warriors. they were really the first team to say, hey, you know what? We're shutting everything down.
No, they shut everything down because they sucked. Had nothing to do with the virus.
Well, okay, well, that might have something to do with it, but
Yeah.
I'm saying, I remember the night. I remember the night.
I cried on that.
Yeah, but still, I remember the night when they were going to play against Utah, and when that second person, I guess, had tested positive, that's when they closed down the game, and then that's when they moved forward and said, okay, you know what, we're not going to play. And I'm saying I do have to tip my hat to them because I felt like they were really the first domino that tipped everything. And a lot of people forget about that. Now, as far as them sucking, it's like, you know what, you ought to lay into you right now. You know I'm a big
They couldn't wait.
I don't appreciate that, okay? All right, look, don't you be talking about my Warriors, man, on my show, man. Don't be doing that, okay?
Yeah.
So anyway, but I will say this much, that we look at the bubble, we look at everything the NBA's done. Yeah, you're right. You got to tip your hat to Adam Silver and what those guys are doing over there. It's an amazing job on their part. And really, when you think about it, the world of sports is watching this now because they've seen what they're doing, and now you see other leagues implementing similar type of styles. Soccer has to a certain degree. You see it also in the NHL. They're doing the bubble. And I'll tell you something, I wouldn't be surprised if NFL tries to implement something similar to it because they're seeing the advantages of it. The fact that they've only had I think since the beginning of this month, they've only had maybe 2 people test positive, which is amazing. Okay. So obviously what they're doing is the right thing. And so you have to give them credit where credit's due.
Well, a little bit of the problem, too, at the college level, and Ben, you could probably pipe in here, is the NBA can afford all this testing, all right? Can colleges afford all this testing? I don't think they can. Like you said, with 90 scholarship players in football, you can't test 90 players every day. I mean, what's your thought on that, Ben? How do we get around this? Because it's more of a financial burden, I think, for colleges. Number one, they're going to lose that football revenue. Number two, how can they afford to, kind of keep policing 100 different players on scholarship?
Yeah, no, the cost part is definitely a challenge. The only thing I will say is a lot of these schools have pretty, I think it's all about how you can kind of how you can allocate your funds to go to the right thing. But a lot of these schools have like mega endowments and tons of money coming in. And I just, the thing I'll say is given all the money that college athletes do make for these schools, and look at some of these endowments or some of these schools like UC Berkeley's like $4 or $5 billion endowment. Stanford's like $27 billion. So I do kind of think
dropped 11 sports.
So, and they are, but yeah. So, but I just feel like with all that money that these schools have, they're sitting on, they have, the money is there. The question is, can they convince people that are in charge of those funds to allocate in that direction? So I feel the money's there. It's just a function of convincing people that that's a good use of the funds. And I just think that given that all that college athletes do for their schools in terms of representation and the fact that they do as a whole generate tons of money for the school, this is a time where schools can give back to them and give them an opportunity to compete, provided that it's actually feasible in terms of keeping them safe. So, if funding testing is the only thing standing in their way and they got everything else figured out, they can at least give it a shot and give it a try.
Well, I think then you got to decide, all right, which sports, there's going to be a higher, all right, football is going to be number one because it makes them most money. Then probably men's basketball. So there's going to be down the line sports, we don't have money for women's field hockey. We don't have money for men's volleyball. So then it becomes a choice. And, hopefully by then we'll have a vaccine and this thing will clear it up by 2021. And what about off season, like playing football in the spring? You can't ask college athletes to play 30 games in 5 months. I'm sorry. Number one. Number two, would you switch basketball then? Because it upsets the recruiting process and everything else. I personally would have just taken 2020 off with everything and start back fresh in 2021. What do you think?
I think you're probably right that would have made things a lot simpler. But, the one thing that the NBA did do is, one thing we kind of learned from them is that they did adjust their calendar a little bit. And you made a good point with the recruiting that kind of
that's huge.
That's huge, right? And that makes things complicated. But I think that, total cancellation is something you want to, that's a last resort thing if possible. And so
Right.
I think with basketball, I think as far as basketball is concerned, I think what makes football harder, you mentioned football, what makes football tougher is it's such a violent physical game, as you obviously know. And so having guys play 30 games in 5 months is just not really feasible. You're right about that. I do feel with basketball, though, it's a little bit more doable because it's not the same level of intensity physically that football is.
Right.
And you can, and the other thing too is while it wouldn't be, let's be real at basketball for a second, college basketball. Nobody really cares about the non-conference season anyway. Like, I'm just being real. Like, nobody really cares about non-conference basketball. I do, but I'm the only guy that does because I write about college basketball. I'm the only guy that really cares about non-conference basketball and whether or not Cal beat, Prairie View A&M or whatever.
Yeah, but you can have some interesting matchups out of conference.
No, there are. I mean, there definitely are. So, I mean, it's not all bad, but I'm just saying as a whole, people don't really tune into college basketball until March. So, if they and conference play doesn't start until traditionally until January 1st, January 2nd, maybe December 30th. So, if college basketball could have a conference only season that started in January, that could work. I mean, they'd be playing 20, Pac-12 be playing 20 instead of 30 games. They're not missing that much. So, I mean, I think from that standpoint, at least for basketball, I think it's smart for basketball to kind of wait this out and look what the NBA is doing and see, is there anything we can learn from this? I mean, one kind of crazy possibility is having some sort of bubble thing in Las Vegas or Seattle or something where guys can kind of all bubble in. And since guys are taking classes online anyway, I mean, it could potentially work with basketball due to the way courses are operating now online.
Right.
And you could pick some sort of neutral site. Maybe you don't want guys in Vegas, but if they do have a bubble and things, there's options there, I think, for hoops. So,
to your point about, the idea of having a neutral zone, we had, Mark J. Spears on here, as you touched on a few weeks ago, and he talked about that. He talked about the fact that if we had, in other words, if the NFL really wanted to do that, they could actually do that too, where they had one neutral site, one neutral area to cover certain regions, of the league. For instance, we have the NFC West. Okay, well, you put the NFC West in the Western area. Okay, you have other parts of the conferences, and they can be in those areas where they're at. Okay, and now you have all these teams playing just against in those conferences, as you pointed. And yes, you're right. Some of those games, and I'll be honest with you, I watch the NFL, but I got to be honest with you, when the Niners play the Cleveland Browns, I'm probably not going to watch that game. Okay, it's like, why? Well, it's Cleveland, dude. I can care less. It's I don't really care about that matchup. Now, when the Niners play the Seahawks, okay, now that is going to catch my interest. Why? First of all, it's the Seahawks. Second of all, it's the NFC West. Okay, and we know the Niners and Seahawks have been battling pretty hard for the last 3 to 5 seasons. So that piques my interest. So, if we did this whole conference thing, if we did it where it's more strategic in a certain area, I think to your point, I think that's something, as Mark J. Spears had pointed out from ESPN, I think it could work because you don't have all that heavy traveling back and forth. You don't have all the heavy interaction, and you got guys that are playing really in the conference that they really want to play it anyway, okay? Because I'm telling you, ask anybody in the NFC West, they'll tell you today, no, would you rather play guys in your own conference? Yes, they would. It's like, why? First of all, the NFC West is probably the most competitive conference out there in the NFL. Everybody knows that. So, it's something that could be possibly done. And speaking to the NFL, nice segue. Okay, so we go over to the NFL and take a look at the fact that we had a very detrimental situation take place today. And Mike and I talked about it earlier. Jalen Hurd, who has been considered a deep prospect by San Francisco. Last season, he couldn't play because of an injury. He's in practice this week, another major injury, torn ACL. So he's gone down, and this is the second year where these guys were thinking this guy was going to bring some excitement to the receiving corps, and now all of a sudden we're in a second straight year where this guy is injured. And so you got to ask yourself, you look at the prospect they picked up in Brandon Ayuk. This is obviously an opportunity for him. But in the back of your mind, you got to be asking yourself, as a GM, you recruited this guy, you signed him, and nothing's come out of it. What do you think?
Who are you asking?
Whoever's ready to respond.
All right. It's unfortunate for Jalen. I'll just say that. He's got all kind of skill. He was a running back at Tennessee for 3 years, and he was their workhorse. So he took a pounding in the SEC, which is like the NFL light, for 3 years. So has that caught up with him, or was he just unlucky? I've seen it. Every team has these guys. And, we're all looking forward to it. But now all of a sudden with Debo down, Jalen Hurd out, all of a sudden the Niners' young receiving core is not looking that good. So they've picked up a couple of veteran players. And so it's going to be interesting. Yeah, we all would have loved to see him. And I haven't seen the result yet, but it looks like it's a torn ACL. And running against the air. But Jared McKinnon did it 2 years ago, last play of practice. Made a cut on the AstroTurf, blew his knee out. So he missed 2 years in a row. So they've been unlucky with a couple of these signings, but that's just sports. You hope it doesn't happen to you, but it's just very unlucky for him. I'll just say that.
Okay, now let me ask you something, Ben. Do you think with Jalen Hurd going down, because this is a question we've been running back and forth on this show last couple of weeks, and I asked last week, I think somebody brought it the week before. I'm gonna bring it up again because Hurd is obviously not going to play. You just talked about the fact that the receiving core is issued. What do you think about the prospect of them bringing Antonio Brown to San Francisco?
I mean, look, I think for the 49ers, obviously once you start losing bodies, you pretty much, how should I say this? Teams in desperate situations will make desperate moves, right? And you're looking for bodies at that point. So maybe bringing in some sort of veteran presence like that can be warranted. So, I'm not as much of a football guy, but obviously, I think if you're a team like the Niners, you lose guys, all options are always on the table, whether that's basketball, baseball, football, whatever. All options are on the table. And, we see a lot of teams give guys a look. So I think for them at least, I don't really see why they wouldn't. And just kind of quickly touching on, in terms of, the risk of being a GM, it's got to just be so difficult to, put your faith in a guy or hope a guy pans out and then have something like that happen, right? It's just really difficult. And I think what's really hard, too, is what do you do when a guy that you think can really help your team win goes down? Do you give them that second chance, in terms of, rehab and being patient with them? It's a really difficult thing. I think with football, what's particularly tough is these guys have such short shelf lives that when a guy goes down, you have a hard time thinking. It's harder to have faith that they can come back. So just really unfortunate situation.
Well, I think with Jalen Hurd and Trent Taylor, same thing. Trent's missed 2 years, another wide receiver. So you got one more year probably, and then they'll turn the page on all of them. So I'll tell you what, Ben, we really appreciate your time and kind of catching us up over there on the Cal campus. And good luck to you in your career. I know you're just getting started. You're with Rivals.com if you want to read Ben Parker. And good luck to the Bears this year.
Appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
And this has been GameFace, and this is on the Bleave Talent Network. Ben Parker, Rivals.com, on with us today. Mike Shumann, always here with us. And I am Richard the Razor Ewing. And if you want to check in with us next week, you can. But just remember, when you come on, you better have your game face on.